Welcome everyone. Today we're going to discuss our future of environment. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. Adam, and Professor David Smith. First, I would like to give chance, Mr. Adam.
Thank you, Sharif. One of my guiding ethical frameworks is suffering-focused ethics, and one of my principal philosophers is suffering abolitionism, pioneered by philosophers and thinkers like David Pearce. And of course, a heck of a lot of suffering happens in the wild, in nature. You know, you got every day there's immense suffering in the wild, with predators and prey, and also things like not just that, but also parasitism and a lot of really, well, you know, they say nature is red in tooth and claw, and it always has been. And one little explored realm of thought is, well, of course, you know, technology is rapidly progressing exponentially, and I think ethics, ethics have to kind of match that, of course. And would it be possible in the future, with enhanced wisdom, enhanced intelligence, maybe aided by AI, would it be possible to do something about the immense level of suffering that's happening in nature? Maybe some kind of like AI stewardship or surveillance system, and of course that's quite controversial. You know, people would usually ask, "Oh, what?" I mean, a lot of people like Sharif you're transhumanist, so I think there's some sympathy towards these kinds of ideas here. But a lot of people find just normal transhumanism controversial enough, let alone wild animal suffering ethics and intervention. But of course, a lot of people ask, what gives us the right to interfere with nature? And well, one answer to that is, well, we are probably the only species on Earth, as far as we know, that can do something, that can use our ingenuity to minimize the level of suffering on this planet. So that gives us maybe a duty to do so. And I personally don't think that our evolution is completely blind. I think, like Anthony, who comes on this show sometimes, I do believe there are like higher beings above us, and so I think our evolution, our destiny is being guided somewhat. So I think the future of the environment, we have to kind of ask difficult questions and consider whether one day we will have the ingenuity to do something about the level of wild animals suffering in nature. I mean, would that involve maybe genetically engineering carnivores, or maybe that's too verboten, and will we have to do some kind of alternative where we do some manipulation of the environment instead, where you set up some kind of biodome or welfare state, for lack of a better term, where you leave predators and carnivores alone, but you let them chase like facsimiles of prey, like automata that are outfitted in lab-grown meat and things like that. So it's probably not the. I think the future of the environment is. I think that could be the future of the environment, where we use transhumanist principles like superintelligence and maybe merging with AI to foster next level of suffering-focused ethics using technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor David Smith.
Adam, thank you for those words. I think your scenarios there were fairly good. But as I look at the
Thank
future of
you.
the environment, there are multiple different ways that you can look at it. Uh, Multiple ways you can look at it, and how it can be directed and done. You know, one of the very important ways to look at it is that if we look at business as usual, kind of where we're going, and do our path going forward, uh, by 2050, the temperature will rise by uh, almost 3.5 degrees Celsius, or about 5.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Bad air quality hurts billions and billions of people. And we're seeing the impact on land just tremendously hit hard. And the, these changes are going to affect all the regions of the earth. And you're going to see across the globe responses to increases in heat trapping gases in the atmosphere, like the carbon dioxide and others, temperatures changing, the weather patterns, participation are dramatically changing, and the rate of climate change going forward is going to be much greater than what we've seen in the past as you look at it. And some scientists really expect some portions of the Earth system to respond much more rapidly to these changing uh, impacts than others. The temperature and atmosphere of the utmost layers of the ocean, for example, are likely to adjust to new conditions more quickly than deep ocean, or the thick ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica versus the ones that are not as thick ice sheets. So some of the rapid changes that I believe will be seen as we look at the future of the environment are things like uh, retreating impacts on the global ice. Uh, you're going to see some disappearance of some of the year-round sea ice in Antarctica. We're already seeing that. Uh, we're seeing impacts today of some of the tundra being replaced by uh, growing forests and other plants like that. And some of the slower ones you're going to see is an increase in the thermal expansion of the ocean. You're going to see the acidity of the ocean increasing. You're going to see a decrease in oxygen levels in the oceans. You're going to see changes to the seasons and others coming up in place, particularly at the higher altitudes, that are going to impact this. But as Adam really pointed out well, that this is the thing that impacts people, and people are the ones making the difference. And we know that as we looked at corporations and others before, that the whole ESG movement in corporations have a major impact on this. And others, as we look at some of the life cycle of carbon, and as we look at how things like biomass, geothermal, hydro, solar, wind power, and others can have impact on the changing environment. And we're at that crossroad, like we've talked about before, on how do we reverse what is happening today, because the future, the environment says we have to reverse what is happening today. We have to put maybe technology solutions in to help on it. We have to uh, look at regulatory impacts. But and we see things like the last COP that was held beginning to look at this on a more global basis, not just the big countries, but the developing nations as well. But as Dr. Talif often states on this, Sharif, when he's done this topic, it boils down to the average citizen, the person. They have to understand that the future of the environment is a real concern. Climate change is a real concern, because they are the ones that have to take action to be effective there. Until those persons can see this as a real change and see the impact, it's going to be hard to get governments and companies to do it as well. And that's what's required, is for all those to come together and look at the future of the environment. And I can work through a couple of the different scenarios I've seen as we develop the program, Dr. Sharif. But I think this is kind of my opening remarks.
Thank you. Now I request Mr. Jason.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, everything was well said. Thanks, Adam and David. Yeah, I mean, the environment is a tricky problem in our society. I mean, we have one planet, and we're kind of running, to some degree, an experiment right now. And that experiment is going to either end up good for us or bad for us. A lot of people I've talked to, they actually think it's already too late, that our environment has so much damage and our rate of accumulation of that damage is happening so quickly, that we're going to run into some major issues in the near term. I actually think we're not too late, but I think it is time to act. I think there's really two fundamental things that we need. One, I think there should be some kind of monetary price for when you're releasing certain things into our environment. Like if we know you're releasing a certain, chemical or carbon or whatever you're doing is doing some damage to our environment, there should be a monetary price on that. And they should have companies should have to pay essentially to do that. And, in turn, in parallel, we have to accelerate progress to develop more advanced alternative energy sources. But really just using the current technology too, and accelerating the development of these projects. I think if you had solar panels, even on like a very, very small percentage of the planet, you could have energy for the whole planet. When you look at the trend of solar, it has been picking up year after year. More and more energy is now coming from solar. So I think it has promise, but there's also a lot of other energy sources like nuclear energy and these other sources that have a lot of potential, and even energy sources that haven't even been created. I think in the future there'll be different ways to make energy that we maybe haven't even thought of yet. But really, I think the time is now to bring these technologies into our society more in a more close way. I mean, you see some houses, they have solar panels, but I think there should be a massive movement. And to some degree, you've kind of seen it. You've seen a lot of energy advocates pursuing this for many years. It's nothing really new. There's always been this discussion, but from my perspective, I think that we're not really moving fast enough. I think that we could be doing a lot more. I think the incentive structures could be more aligned. We could be putting more and more R&D to get these technologies to be better to some degree, because right now the efficiency to extract oil, to produce, you fill up your car, you fill up your tank. Extracting that oil is so easy than it used to be, because the technology has improved. So these big oil companies, they've been able to make tons of a lot of money, and they've been able to extract a lot of resources from the planet. But as we know, those resources are finite, and we're not going to be able to continue to extract those indefinitely forever. Even collecting energy from the sun, eventually the sun will go out. But I think that's a much longer time frame, and I think we could use that energy for many, many years. I mean, billions of years, however long the sun is going to last, right? So not a real time constraint on that. So I think transitioning more to solar, transitioning to nuclear, which, there's actually, you think about how many people die from the environment versus how many people are dying from these alternative energy sources. And it's actually much worse than people think. So we should be transitioning to nuclear, should be transitioning more aggressively to solar. I think that we've, gotten to the point where the solar panels are pretty good, but what we need to see is a massive drop in price, right? If I go and I'm like, okay, let me power my house or my car, and energy from an alternative green source is way cheaper than these other non-clean sources, I'm going to do that. So a lot of it comes down to the money, and I think it just makes the most sense to get them to the point where they're cheaper, and move that more aggressively. And as more and more competition comes into the space, and more technology is refined to produce green, clean energy, I think we'll get there. In the interim, we'll have to keep doing what we're doing, but really the damage has been done. The environment has already had some damage. The question is, we're kind of running these in parallel. Like, can we fix some of that damage, or can we slow it down, or can we eventually repair it completely? I actually think we will be able to not only repair the environment in the future, but make it much better for humans through the use of nanotechnology. We'll be able to alter the environment and our entire ecosystem. You think about what it was kind of given to us. It was given to us in a certain way. The planet, we didn't engineer it this way. However, it was created for us, and now we're starting to destroy it, with our tools and because of living here. And I think we should fix it and engineer it to be way better. There's nothing to say that we can't engineer our planet to be much better than it is today through nanotechnology, through these new tools. And I think we are going to see that when we get out to the 2030s and 2040s. So, yeah, that's kind of where I see the future of the environment going. And thanks, Sharif, and everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Dr. Talib Rafael, what you want to discuss on future of environment?
Okay. The environment is a very important part of our life now. That's for sure. But I agree with Jason. I think it's Jason, right? I agree with him.
Yes, that's correct. Thanks.
That man can overcome that. You can with the technology now, you can overcome that. And, climate change would be addressed just as anything else has been addressed in our history, in the past. So it's important that we put our heads together and try to raise awareness of this, but not panic about it. Panicking is not good. Panicking will only bring us back to where we are now. So I think that it's important to do what Jason said, which is basically to utilize our technology now to try and save our planet, because our planet is now under serious threat. And although I always say that sustainability is not just about the environment, it's not just about the environment. There's social, economic, and political sustainability also. But the environment is very important, because without, what's sustainability? Sustainability is to sustain life on Earth. That's what it is, for the future generations to enjoy it. That's what sustainability is all about. Now, environmental sustainability is important, because without saving our planet, we cannot secure our sustainability for the future generations. That's for sure. But having said that, I think we can do it, and we are going to do it. I think we are going to do it. I agree with Jason. I think we can do it. But we need to be serious about it. That's for sure. Thank you so much. That's what I want to say for the time being. Let me hear what the others have to say. Thank you, Sharif. Thank you, Doctor.
Nice.
Has Sharif frozen again? Oh,
Looks like we lost Sharif, but yeah, no, it's an interesting problem. I mean, I think I wonder what will happen in the future. I mean, when we discover these new planets out in our universe, and I'm sure those environments are probably different than ours. And I kind of wonder too, like when we measure things on our planet, like what is the accuracy of these measurements, and can we measure them? And because you can't change what you can't measure to some degree. So I think one of the big things is first measurement. Figuring out, okay, like we have all these tools, can we measure specific factors, specific signals in our environment? And then when we take an action, can we measure a change? And this is, of course, going to take many, many years to see any change. But I think having that measurement system in place so we know if something's working or not would be critical. Any thoughts on that, guys?
I agree, Jason. But I think that thinking about other planets now is not going to be useful. We have to think about our planet. Now.
Yes.
That's what's the most important thing now. I don't know what's going to happen without other planets. Nobody knows that. It's just speculation about the future. Now, I think we should take care of our planet. We have been living in our planet for years and years, thousands of years now. And I think it deserves from us to take care of it. That's what I want to say.
I agree. I agree with you, Khalid, is we need to there and take care of ours and see kind of what's happening, because we know even with our most conservative estimate, the Earth is going to continue to warm, and the effects will be profound as we see them. And even though we've been able to slow the range, it's still going there. So there's going to be some net damage is to the cost of the environment over the time, and hopefully we can mitigate it more, but they're going to be fairly significant, and particularly if we look at the impacts of the global warming, which is there, and the impact of the seawater levels and everything. Because if you look at some of the estimates today, that by the end of the century, the sea levels will raise either at the low end a foot, so about 0.3 meters, but at the high end about 8 feet, or about 2.5 meters. We're going to see the seawater level. We see the climate change is going to be, at least through the end of this century, we'll see more extreme weather, like hurricanes, heavier storms, more droughts, more heat waves at the two extremes. We're going to see longer wildfire seasons, like we've already seen in Asia, for example, hitting. And just so many more impacts of it, as we see, for example, the Arctic is very likely to become ice-free, is some of the scenarios we see going forward with the environmental impacts. Oh, and I see Sharif has brought up one of the slides that I put in there. If you look at the ESG movement for companies, which are the environmental, social, and governance side of that, we see that for the companies on that, you're going to be really trying very hard to be able to balance the changes in climate change, the greenhouse gas, the waste and pollution, the hazard materials on the diversity side. And that's for the environmental side. The social side, how do you impact those? But in the governance side, you have to have governance in place to be effective with those changes. But those really go away as you begin to look at the carbon cycle. And the carbon cycle is part of what we've been talking about this morning, is how can I begin to use that in a way to change the environment? How can I look at what we produce, be it fossil fuel based or wind based or hydro or others? But how do I get that? How do I get those up in the atmosphere? How do I fix the atmosphere? How do I use photosynthesis? How do I look at the impact of the carbon dioxide exchange in the ocean? Because the ocean is one of the biggest things for sucking up carbon dioxide and using it and trapping it underneath. And how can I move that through the rock foundations? But really, the two other slides which I have in this are the ones that take you to the other part of the equation. This is a slide that begins to look at the impact of the other sources against the environment. So what is the impact of biomasses? Geothermal? What's the impact of hydro? You begin to look at the wind. Wind is interesting because you have to look at wind onshore and wind offshore. Two very different criteria there. We did a program recently on fusion. Fusion has an impact on helping with the future of the environment and how that changes. So let me just step back a minute, and one of the climate change groups is looking at the environment, produced two scenarios of the future of the environment. And one of them was business as usual. And I'm just looking at power today. If they say business as usual, which has the temperature going up almost 4 degrees centigrade, the mix would be 76% fossil, about 16% renewable, and about 7% nuclear. And I'm using fusion and radioisotopes and other things in the nuclear here. What they say is the most sustainable path, though, is to reduce the fossil fuel down to 13%, increase the renewable sources to about 54%, but actually increase the nuclear energy up to 33%. And so just using their two scenarios, and business as usual is going to be really bad for the globe. Their sustainable path in here actually begins to reduce carbon footprint over time and actually helps fix the environment. But you see, we have to dramatically change our mix of materials. We have to look at all of these different ones, from the biomass, the geothermal, the wind, hydro, and others, and combine that with the nuclear option to really have the big impact on the environment that is probably necessary for us to become sustainable. And I would love to see the different mixes we can do. But when I was looking at some of the scenarios for the future environment, this was one that jumped out particularly at me because of its impact on being able to really make a difference as you're going forward with it. And those numbers, by the way, are for the next 30 years. And we know that by 2050, if I follow a conservative path, there's going to be almost 10 billion people on the earth. We can expect over a 50% increase in food demand and over a 50% increase in energy demand. So just using those statistics where we have approximately 10 billion and we have to increase by over half our food and our energy demand, it's not a sustainable path from what we have today. You know, if we just, to put it really, I guess bluntly, if we stay on today's path, we risk being trapped in an intensive cycle of scarcity. We can expect global temperatures to increase, worsen air pollution, harder time to all types of food and food stock. Habitat loss continues. We'll see less than 50% of our native grasslands and forest intact. The food, water, energy really makes it, and the percentages in the Paris Exchange and things just have no way of being met if we continue our business as usual. And Dr. Clay, understand. And if the average citizens don't understand them, the likelihood of us being successful is very low. So Sharif, that's my comments here.
I say something, Dr. Sharif. I say something.
I think he's still frozen. I think
Go
he's
for
frozen.
it.
Go ahead.
Okay. 70 to 75% of the carbon footprint is coming out of cities. And cities are growing whether we like it or not, because the population is growing and population is traveling from the countryside to the city. So cities can be a key element here. If we concentrate on cities and city administrations, and if we do build better cities and cities that can utilize the vertical gardens and the solar energy and all of the above in a better way, that may be a solution. Because 70 to 75% of our carbon footprint comes out of cities now. So imagine if we solve 70% of the problem. If we do that, then that's a good success, I think. Now, the other thing is, I was in Cyprus last year for a climate change conference organized by UN agency. Now, they were talking about climate change in the Middle East and the East Mediterranean. And they were saying that it's one of the hottest spots in the world for that. Now, when I came back here to Jordan, where I'm talking from, by the way, I am in Jordan, James and Johnson. I'm speaking to you from Jordan, from Amman, Jordan. And it's impossible how to get to the minds of the people that they are the hottest place in the world. People don't care here. They just want to think about the problems that they have at hand now. They don't care about the problems of tomorrow. They want the problems of today to be solved, which you can't blame them. So they are not ready to listen to what you have to say. And that's probably the case in many parts of the developing world, where people are not very concerned about the climate change. Not because it's not going to hit them, because it's not a danger for them now. And what they care about is now, today, because they are not being given their rights. They're not living under normal circumstances. There's poverty, there's unemployment, there's lots of problems in our parts of the world. So people on the streets are not talking about climate change now. That's a problem. I'd like you to take that in mind, please, when you discuss climate change in the future. Thank you so much.
Nice.
James. Yes, Jason. Go ahead.
It's definitely across the board. Yeah, well said from everyone, and it's yeah. Let's see what we can do.
Adam, your thoughts?
Thank you. The environmental question or the environment problem is interesting. I think it's made people question many of our burgeoning endeavors. One of the most obvious being space tourism. We have seen great leaps in space tourism and private space endeavors mobilized by people such as Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and popularized with pop culture icons like William Shatner. And it brings out a cynical side in some journalists. I noticed when they went up, very soon after those individuals went into space, people were asking, why are these people going up there when there is still plenty of work to be done down here? And I don't see why people can't see that we can do multiple projects at once. And on the other hand, I think there is some merit to the Star Trek vision where space travel for all could unite us and inspire us to help focus more on our planet instead of being a distraction. Space travel and tourism doesn't necessarily have to be a distraction or a diversion from the big questions like the one about our environment. I do think personally it could be the opposite. There is a phenomena where astronauts go up and see the Earth from above and come back down to Earth more inspired to try and heal the world rather than leave it behind and go on to the next destination. And as a techno-optimist, I've always thought that by the time the heat death of the universe is scheduled to come around, we will have the technology to prevent it or reverse it. And so on a much smaller scale, I hope more advanced tech will be sophisticated enough and microscale enough to reverse the damage bulkier earlier generation technology did to our environment. So I grew up very much with what Jason said earlier about nanotechnology. And I think exploration is important. Something else Jason touched upon. I think exploration is important, whether it's space exploration or underwater ocean exploration, because we might discover some kind of substance up there or down there, and in a new species of seaweed or deposits that can only be found in extreme environments or whatever, that could be researched and developed into new tools and methods to protect vulnerable environmental characteristics. So the key is long-term thinking, which requires discipline and restraint. We have to, like Dr. Talib said, we have to keep future generations in mind, our children, our children's children, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Thank you.
James.
Thank you.
Jason.
Sure. I think we've covered most of it. But yeah, I guess just to expand on what James was saying, I think, I think we have to move fast. I think that, we need more collaboration across different countries. I mean, think about like how much global emissions actually comes from the U.S. is pretty small compared to the whole planet. So we really have to work with our partners, work with other countries around the world, and get China and India in particular on board with what we want to do, because they have such a large population, so much infrastructure. In the past, the U.S. has always been the leader in many areas, but China is growing so quickly, and I mean they may become the economic leader in the future, and I think that they should be driving some of this too, for sure. And of course, there's a lot of solar companies in China and innovation happening there, and so it's really a global thing that we have to get everyone on board. I mean, hundreds of countries. And I'm sure there's a lot of this within the UN discussions on what they can do and how they can coordinate, something so large scale. But I think it has to be done, and I think over time it will, and hopefully the leaders of our world can see what's happening and accelerate this, and not have to have these other small grassroots people, trying to make change when it should be really these large entities, governments and large corporations pushing this forward and seeing what's happening and moving towards what we need, a cleaner environment. I mean, when I'm like go out by the water and you see like, just plastic bags like right there, in the water, and you're like, I think there's a certain level of awareness that our society hasn't really, brought about yet. I mean, it's like people just throwing their Pepsi cans or plastic water bottles just right into the ocean. It's not great. It's not great for it. And even like exploration within the oceans are so big, and we should continue to explore those more. How do we engineer a better ocean in the future? There's so many species that still haven't been discovered even. But really, it's so multi-layered. We really need bigger conversations about it, and there's also overlap from other industries and other fields too, that can be leveraged to pursue this mission. And I think we'll get there. I think that our environment will be fine, but not everyone is going to think that. And to be honest, when you look at the actual trends, it's hard to even think that to some degree when you're like, okay, like the environment's shifting. We can measure something. We've we think about how much carbon has been released. There's probably an effect. I mean, it always turns very like anything environmental, really anything in our society here in the U.S. It turns very like political. Like you have two parties that have existed, for so long, and it's generally like each party is kind of pointing at the other one, saying, oh, they're not doing it correctly, which is why to some degree, these parties like the Green Party, hopefully can get some more momentum. I mean, not to say they're gonna win here in the U.S. anytime soon, but just getting that support and taking their ideologies and pushing it into the main parties and kind of bringing them together, because at the end of the day, like everyone's living on the planet. until we can, move off it to Mars, and Elon can help us do that. But yeah, I think it's going to be a tough thing to get everyone on board. But I think it's just pushing it forward, continuing having conversations like this, and I think we'll get there. So, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Smith, Professor David Smith.
I agree with what has been said globally around here. We see the impacts of the changes to the environment. We hear a range of forecasts of what's going to happen, from the fact that it's irreversible to where I agree with Jason on this one. I think we still can have action and can have an impact and reverse it. We've talked about the changing mixes of what's required in the future environment, and we've seen its impact being a global one across large countries and small ones. Jason mentioned the impact of, for example, plastic in the ocean. I was surprised to see by far the country that deposits more plastic in the oceans, the Philippines. Orders of magnitude. The Philippines and then India are the two largest countries in plastic waste going into the ocean, which is an environmental impact as well, in addition to global warming. And it has broad impacts to the environment. And we see that the transition going away from fossil fuels is essential, but then it's going to impact, with particularly many of the renewals, some present day land usage challenges. Not only just on the land, but as we've talked about before, the use of windmills, both offshore and onshore, kill a lot of birds and other impacts like that. So there's consequential impacts to going to a renewable energy. We have to look at food. We have to look at sea levels. We have to really look on how it affects biodiversity and how those impacts. By making changes, though, to the food, the water, and energy use, it ripples across most of the other areas that we have that are impacted by environmental change. And particularly as we look at diversity of our fish, of our animals, and others, and water. I mean, water is the lifeline of nations. And if we do not have an impact on the future of the environment, water, which is already a critical issue now, is just going to become more critical. And it's going to cause future wars. The whole environmental area will invariably lead to future wars. And it's another reason to really look at the future of the environment. But Dr. Sharif, this is such a complicated topic because anything you change in it ripples and affects all the other parts of it. And it's this rippling, is how the pieces are interconnected together that is important as we try to look at the future of the environment. We can't just change one thing. We have to change a multitude of things. And then there's both intended consequences and unintended consequences as we change those things, as we've seen. So, Dr. Sharif, this is another one where we have to go beyond what the COP conferences have done, as we look at how we can take this and make sure that the average people understand the importance, because they're the ones who have to drive this action more than just companies and more than governments. So, Sharif, thank you for letting me throw those comments back on this.
Thank you. Dr. Talib Rafael.
Okay, Dr. Sharif, this is a very important topic, as David said. I agree with David that we need to look at this in a multiple way and in a very complex way, not just the developed countries, but the developing countries as well. They have a responsibility on their shoulders, definitely. But again, as I said, let's start with cities, for example. That's a good idea. Start with cities and make cities more independent on their own products, their own agricultural products, on their own industrial products, on their own technological products. Now, I know that the alternative energy sources are limited now. You have fusion, which I don't encourage very much because atomic fusion is connected to atoms, and the atoms would be resented by many people around the world now, regardless of what they do or what they don't do, regardless how safe it is. But even if we do that, there is also solar energy, there is wind energy, there is movement energy, which is caused by water falling from one high place to another lower place. And there is also now in many cities around the world, the cars moving can disseminate some energy there, and trains moving and subways moving. All of this movement must be translated in cities, particular, must be translated into energies. And we should try to use our skyscrapers as vertical gardens, as solar collectors. I think we can do that. That's one of the things that we can all embark on. Now, how do we do that? I believe that Jason is right in saying that the world must come together to do this. And we have to work on this together. The COP 27, 28 now in Dubai after this is not going to help us much because they're only talking about carbon footprints. And that's not all what it's all about. It's about much more complex things than that. It's about the whole life notion on Earth. It's about sustainability, which is keeping life for the future generations. That's what it's all about, really. Thank you so much, Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Talib Raphael. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks for today?
I can only echo what has been said, is that it's important for us to take action today, that the future of the environment is a complex system that has to be managed by a global effort to impact it. We see in areas like the plastic changes to it that the country of the Philippines has 4 times the impact in that area than the rest of the world combined, in fact, in there. And others, we see that all of these impacts of it are global impacts, and we've got to understand it. But if we use the past to predict the future, we can go back and see things that happened in our history and the impacts and how long it took to reverse part of that. And we need to put plans in place to handle it with today. But I so agree with what Dr. Talib has reminded me multiple times in the past. It's not just something companies can do, not just something that the government can do. You have to get the input from the citizens to understand it is real. Then they will help drive the government and the companies to take action.
Very true.
The differences between COP26 and COP27 is it went from the large countries to the developing nations, and it needed to. What we need to do in the next COP is say, how can we take it and make the people of the earth understand it and have the whole ecosystem working to solve the problem?
Simplify it.
That's my thought. Yeah, simplify it, understand the impacts, understanding what each of the stakeholders can do. We need to get this down to the stakeholder level and out of being so much of a theory, but we've got to see what the stakeholders can do at each range and have the roadmap to do that. Once we have that roadmap at that level, our likelihood for success goes measurably up. And that's what we need to do, is we have to increase our likelihood for success. We have to take the data, make it understandable, take the actions that need to happen, make them understandable, and work forward to correct the environment. So that's my closing remarks, Sharif.
Thank you. Professor Talib Rafal, what's your concluding remarks for today?
I just said what I wanted to say, Sharif. Let me repeat it again. I think what we need to do is, one, involve the ordinary citizen in all of this. I think the educational system here is important also. We don't teach that at the schools yet. We don't teach it at universities. We are hearing about it only from different sources. And the future generation, the young people especially, will have to know this because they are the future of our planet. That's for sure. So the education system is very important in this regard. The second point I want to make is about cities. I did say that cities are very crucial here. We should try to solve the problem of cities first, and then, because 50% of the world population now is going to be living in cities by the year 2030. That's for sure. So that's a problem that we could tackle in a much more organized way and systematic way. Cities can compete with each other to do that, and you could create some prizes for that. You could create some competition between cities, who does it best, and involve the young people in this. That's the way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Adam, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Thank you. Yeah, Jason raised an important issue about nations like China and India, and Dr. Talib about developing countries. I think those parts of the world are a bit of a blind spot as far as campaigners like Greta Thunberg are concerned. There is a trend to just shame the West, and I think it's because many Westerners have been kind of browbeaten into being kind of submissive and not to answer back. But I think the West has pioneered and progressed a lot to be thankful for, not just technologically, but also philosophically, morally, and ethically. But if individuals like Greta Thunberg could turn their attention to countries like China and India, that could set a precedent for others to do the same, and then some pressure could be applied to them. And China has all these ghost cities that were built and remain uninhabited, and there was also criticism towards mainstream campaigners like Thunberg and others for skimming over issues such as mines in Africa used for metals and minerals that go into making our smartphones like cobalt. So I think we need to move away from this trend of just like shaming the West or the First World, or and see what other countries are doing as well. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining today's session. This is very interesting because we have to think more about the future of environment, and what we learned from today's session, hopefully we can change our behavior, we can take more actions, and especially we can develop better policy, and we can innovate new technology. Through this process we can solve future problem of environment. Thank you, Mr. David. Thank you, Mr. Talib Rafael. And thank you, Mr. Adam, for joining today's session.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Do you have anything tomorrow, Sharif? We have
Yes.
something tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It's about
yes.
what?
It's about technology.
Technology.
Yes.
Okay.
Innovation. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.